Thanks, Heiner, for the introduction and also for the invitation for this talk. I share my desktop, my presentation with you. So do you see all my presentation?
Yes.
Okay. So perhaps, sorry, first of all, on my background, because perhaps not everybody of you know me. So I'm at the University of Bonn, but on the other hand side, I'm also at the ZBMed Information Center for Life Sciences. And there my research topics are a little bit different to what's done in PhenoRob. It's semantic search engine and information extraction for text, for literature. It's terminology service, which is in part to support fair data publishing. And we are working on new data portals, in that especially in the context of the National Research Data Infrastructure. We are currently mainly working in the health area because I'm heading NFDI for health, but hopefully from next year on, we are working Fair Agro, and there we will develop a data portal for this kind of agriculture data, a central one. And PhenoRob will be also part of Fair Agro if that will be funded. Okay. So the topic today is fair data principles. So I assume most of you have already heard of that. And for the acronym, FAIR stands for Findable, Accessible, Interoperable, and Reusable of data. And before I start to go into more detail what that means, I would like to give you some more background why this publication was so important and why the single publication 2016 is now, every scientist, at least at a senior level, knows the acronym FAIR already. So first of all, research data is the basic of scientific knowledge in almost all areas of science. It might be digitalization, it might be source research, experiments, measurements, or also surveys. And historically, so what has been established is that we publish this data in a form of a written publication, in a journal publication. So that's our standard way, and that will also be in the future the standard way of publication, because that's the easiest way for us to communicate really complex knowledge. That's really the easiest way. But on the other hand side, there's an increasing need for establishing new standards for data publication. And why that's the case? On the one hand side, we have a huge increase in the past years in data publication, in production rate, and also in data volumes, what we generate. And this written publication does not hold true what it has been in the past. It's difficult to put the data directly in the written publication. So, and what we have seen in the past years, the numbers of supplementary files increased also with the publication. And that is really a nightmare for discovery, for archiving, for the formats, and to get access. So that's not the way it should be ideally done. The second point is we have a lot of evolvement in the techniques for this large data production. So there's a lot of change, and an example from your area is the kind of sensors which has been developed in the past years. And so there's a lot of change in that. And that means also for the data, you need this information, because depending on the technique you use, depending on the algorithm you use, it might be completely differently what you get in the analysis of the data. So that you sometimes really have apple and pears. So that means on that is you need more and more information on the provenance, and ideal also in an automatic way that you can understand that and use this data. So in addition, the reuse of data is becoming more and more important. I think from the talk last time, last PILS presentation, we have heard about satellite data, and that was really clear that the data is already built to be reused. But nevertheless, I think everybody of you should think of your data, what you generate, if that's also possible to reuse, and think about that in such a form of data sharing. from the methodological point of view, from the data science point of view, if we are looking for new techniques, that's the diagram on the right-hand side, we see that we have an increase in performance when we use the so-called deep learning methods. But if you compare that with other machine learning methods, you see this increase is based on the access of more data. So we have the chance to have a better performance, but we need more data. That is coming again to reuse of data. So that means from the paradigm, what we, I think in a lot of cases we have today is you generate your data, you do some extraction, some analysis, and then you do publication, and then the data is lost. So, and what we would like to reach with fair data is that this data is more properly described, that it's easier to reproduce, that it's easier to validate or to compare, that if the results of this data can be generalized, and that it can be used also for other data usage. So that means if you're looking for the data, your own generation of data, you have the full control over the experiment, but also about the instruments, but it might be costly and time intensive and expensive. And you also, and that's your responsibility, you have the control over the publishing. So which kind of data do you publish? How many metadata, which means information about your data you are publishing, do you provide? Is that metadata, is that machine readable or not? What about the provenance, where the data comes from, how it is produced? And so you are really in control. The other hand is true if you're looking for secondary data. If you reuse data, then you have no control how the data is collected, what instruments are used. But on the other hand side, it's very cost effective and time saving. So, but you are completely depending on the metadata which has been published with the data. Otherwise, yeah, so if you don't have the information, you can't use the data, or it's very difficult. And that's the point of the current shortcomings. That is a survey from 2016 for data science. So data scientists doing data analysis. But if you're looking on the time proportion, you see here 20% of the time is dedicated for the collection of data, and 60% of the time is dedicated about the preparation of data. So you are data science expert, but 80% of your time is going in really annoying stuff, I would say. So that's one of the shortcomings we have today. Another point, what's a paper here from the health area, test from high impact factor papers to try to reproduce results here from 53 papers. Only in 11% of the cases, 6 papers could be reproduced. All others could not be reproduced. And from the experience from a lot of different researchers, that seems to be true if you're try to reproduce other data, or even if you reproduce your own data, you sometimes fail. So that's not an absolute number, so it's only have you already failed in reproducing some data. So now coming back to the FAIR principles, what do they mean and why are so important? To dive into these principles. The first point is the two first ones are addressing really the discoverability of data. And the first one, which is important, is that you assign to a data an identifier. So if you publish data, please assign a persistent identifier to that. The second one, assign rich, and that's a discussion, what is rich? Metadata to it. And the third one, which is also important, is that this identifier, this information is registered in and indexed in a searchable resource. So That's really the first part of being fair of publishing data, if you have this aspect, address this aspect. And that's with the discoverability is also to the accessible. So if you publish this data, it should be retrievable with this persistent identifier. And the rest is discussing that. So these two is addressing not only you as a researcher, but this is addressing this what a service should provide if you publish data, or if data is discoverable. And in the fair data world, that is now defined everything what you publish as a fair digital object. And again, the fair digital object is defined according to this FAIR principle. You have a persistent ID. This digital object is described by metadata. This digital object can be text, it can be data, it can also be software, or it can also be collection of data, which is aggregated in a digital object, which we would see, for example, for workflow, complete workflow. And it is stored in a repository. So to give you another depiction of that one, you have in the core, you have your digital data object in blue. You have then the metadata describing this data. You have a service interface where you can access the data with an identifier. So that's called, so that's a realization of a digital object in a publication process. And if you have all this, they have reached already a lot in the context of FAIR. The next two, I would say, are a little bit more difficult to reach, at least if you're going really in more detail. Interoperability, on the one hand side, addresses how this data can be accessed, how the metadata is stored, and that should be formal language for knowledge representation. So that's, again, most part done in the infrastructure area. The second part, the I2, is something which is clearly also on the researcher side, to use vocabularies that follow FAIR principles. What does that mean again? So that means these vocabularies should be published. They should have metadata and they should have persistent identifiers. And for vocabulary, it does not only mean to have persistent identifier for the whole terminology, but they normally have a persistent identifier for each concept. And the third one is that it could or should include qualified references to other metadata or to other important data. The last one, the reusable part, is also harder to get, at least if you're looking for this point of machine readability. You should have a plurality of accurate and relevant attributes, and that's how they're defined. That should be defined domain relevant. And so that means it should be defined, in your case, phenotype community relevant. And another point is that you have data usage license, and you should provide provenance. So that's easy said, but how can we do that? How can we read that in reality? And what are simple steps? So I can recommend you this publication with some simple rules for publication of FAIR data. So the first one is about the deposition of data. Deposit your data somewhere what you trust. So in a lot of the cases, that's very easy. So if you are researching in the area of genomics and omics data analysis, there are quite specific, domain-specific databases I assume you all know about. For example, Gene Expression Omnibus for expression data, or Bonares for long-term field experiments. In these cases, if you have a specialized database, oftentimes you have already standards which are defined there. Here's an example of one of the oldest standards established in the area of expression data. I think it was around 2000. It's Miami, the minimal information about a microarray experiment as one example. So what are the most important criteria? What you should publish on data? In this example, it's raw data and it's the final process data. Information about the annotation, experimental design, sufficient annotation, and so on. The reality is that a lot of companies, even though we have these standards, a lot of companies do live with preparing this data more standardized to usage, to heterogeneous uses for companies. So I don't know how many companies are out there. So, but nevertheless, it's a good starting point, at least to have a standard for metadata. So beyond these established areas of the large data components, you have a lot of other data which can be published. And if there's no suitable discipline-specific repositories, there are a number of generalist repositories where you can submit your data. I think the most well-known is Zenodo. For the life science area at ZBMed, we also have the Fachrepositorium Lebenswissenschaften. You have also an institutional repository where you can deposit your data, or you have now the PhenoRob infrastructure, PhenoRob. I don't know if it's already able to publish data, but it's on the way to do that also. And these last two are well suited also to set up, which is the ideal case, that you have a pipeline in-house, a data repository where you publish the data first in-house, because then you can share it before you publish it externally. The main point, if you're looking for repositories, should be that they allow the publication of data, and there's a lot of repositories available, that they are assigned persistent identifier, that they assign metadata, and that this published data should be findable in a search engine. That again is what's coming from findability in the FAIR data. So that means at least in this point you have reached that already. But again, think about a lot of supporting material which is currently mostly published as supplementary information. Think about if it contains valuable information which might be good to be machine readable. In most of the cases, you start with machine readable stuff, or at least Excel tables, and then you put it in a supplementary information as a PDF. So you lose all machine readability on the way. So that's an easy going to publish it with an own persistent identifier, make it computer readable, and also, which is one of the FAIR criteria, assign license to your publication. And there, for example, for documents, there's a Creative Commons license where you can look up and put that here. I've done that now in the slide with this depiction in my slide. It's clear that you can use this data with this license, what is shown here in this depiction. So again, easy to do. And then you have a lot done in the area of FAIR data publication. The next point is a persistent identifier. So as I said before, if you publish your data, you have digital object, and then you can get a persistent identifier. Other points are also, you as an author can also have a persistent identifier, and we as a research organization can have persistent identifier, which makes it much more easier to refer to your own publications or to your organizations. And there are public organizations now available to do that. So perhaps all of you know DataCite, which is a leading non-profit organization for persisting identifiers for digital object. Almost a lot of publications now have this DOI, the digital object identifier there. And with DataCite, they come already in really very generic metadata scheme, which only for six different properties, which are mandatory. The M means mandatory. Only the identifier, creator, title, publisher, publication year, and so on is mandatory, and a number of very generic additional factors which are recommended or optional. But at least here you can also put in your rights, your license agreement. For persistent identifier for authors, I recommend to use the Open Research and Contributor ID, ORCID, because again, it's an open organization. Here's my ORCID ID. It's in the ORCID, they connect this with other identifier areas, and you get automatically an update of every publication, and you can assign these identifier directly to your manuscript. So not much to do. And similar, and you can also attach additional information when you would like, and you can use it as sign-in independent on a commercial site, such as Google sign-in. And I hope more and more sites allow this sign-in with ORCID. Similar is true for research organization registries. That's not as well established as the ORCID, but nevertheless, University of Bonn has already ORCID, which you can use in your manuscript, in your publication. And you see here in this information that the University of Bonn is also a member of the DataCite communication. Okay, but going beyond that very generic metadata, is there more what you can do or what can be provided in the infrastructure much more easily? There are other generic metadata templates. Two examples of those are Dublin Core and Data Catalog Vocabulary. And what you see here directly, the definition, what that is, the talk about semantic web and linked data principle. Both metadata templates have been developed in this context, and that directly relates back to the formal knowledge language. If you use semantic web, you directly have these formal knowledge language there, and also, again, you're a little bit more fair. And these two templates, even though they are generic, they at least provide a lot of more detail how you can assign rich metadata. And that's a point in getting more deeper in this area. What can you do to make your metadata computer readable? What are easy steps to do? The first one is also simple. Use standards for the representation of measuring units. So one example, what is already in Dublin Core, a simple example, is the representation of date. Very simple. So it's an ISO standard already. And so that means you could agree as one point that everybody generating data use always this ISO standard. So no exception. Then in such a way, every machine can read the date. And in this, my example of the slide, here's an ISO standard of the date. It's first the years with 4 digits, a dash, then the month, and then the day. Very easy, and you can do it with every measure unit you apply for in your group or in PhenoRob. So simple to do, low level, gets a number of problems done. Also, you can use more specific metadata, and I think that's already established in the Geodesy and also in everything what we are doing in PhenoRob. You can use specific metadata, and this example is geospatial metadata. They have a lot of advantage there because our tools available, additional information is available, and hopefully over time they're coming more and more specific metadata baselines available through the national research data infrastructures, where such tools and such standards will be provided, but you can support these also to think about what are good standards for your application you need. As I said before, machine readability, interoperability is the hardest to reach, and the web of data, W3C, is the focus, tries to focus on this one to support this this interactive use of data. And the vision of the W3C is that we have a web of linked data. And that's the most hardest part. That's the precondition is that we use standards, for example, for the expression, but also use fair vocabulary to make that possible. And that's the hardest part. And the standards that has been established how to use this vocabulary is really an ontology. The definition of an ontology, it is a knowledge model which defines the set of concepts and relationships in between. And the standard language, how it is used, is normally the web ontology language OWL. So the benefit is using always these standards is that you have a common way of sharing knowledge, and this knowledge share can be done for people as well as for machines. And as I said before, the concept there is to have persistent identifier for everything, and they use so-called URIs for every concept, unique persistent identifier which you refer to. And that's the idea of having linked data and to link data to other data. So, but as I said before, that's the next level of complexity, and the question is how to start and at least generate a core data set where you can adhere to a standard. And my proposal would be, or a good starting point there might be AgriVoc, which contains sufficient entries for describing entities, and I show shortly some examples there. And how can you express that? How complex is that to write that down instead of writing here in this example winter barley? You can assign that already if you use the short term for the vocabulary, use AgriVoc, and then write winter barley. In such a way, you already can directly use this information and transform it to semantic concepts in your data dictionaries, in your metadata. And that is in the reusability, that really would increase the reusability of your data. And as I said before, so one part to make that also usable, that you can use that, is to use terminology service, which provide lookup service either as web service that you can look up, okay, what concept do I need to have, do I want to have? And there are a number of terminology services which provide widgets. So that means provide smaller service which you directly can use in your infrastructure and can plug in, that you can use it. And these ontologies provide oftentimes a lot of information, background information about the definition of the concept, of the synonyms, hierarchical information, links to other concepts, and makes it easier, especially in interdisciplinary context, to learn what a concept really means. So not only for the computer, but also for the humans. But not everything is solved yet. So that's really an area where there's a lot of work done, a lot of projects done. So on the one hand side, really, there's a need to customize that to your use cases. And also a problem is that the coverage of vocabularies is currently an open issue. And I give you one example, or some examples from the PhenoRob database. This is a slide from a presentation of Annika Bonneroth, who's responsible for the development of this database. What you see here is a number of entities which would be interesting to get some semantic knowledge about. Here colored now in red. What is Longreach? What is behind this one, these compounds which are used. And if you search, I've searched these points in all ontologies and came up with nothing. So these are currently not represented in any ontology which is available, at least what I know what's publicly available. But if you're looking a little bit deeper, if you're looking for the internet, you find the information. So lomurit is winter barley or some kind of winter barley. So if you're looking here for more information, what is contained in ADEXA, you get these substances and here also. And so that means really gap currently is that we have no links between the commercial products and the crop classes on the one hand side, but a lot of information is visible, is available in the internet. And that's a gap where we currently are, and I would like to, in the end, go to some web pages here. So I hope you all see now the web page of lomurit. Do you see that?
Yeah, we can see.
Okay, so that's one example what a lot of information you can find here in this page about. In this example, there's a lot of information if you're looking from the point of data science, of data analysts, which might be quite useful if you would have that as information. I would also like to show you how terminology servers look like and what information is there. Here's the example of winter barley. And that's AgriVoc. And what you find here is you get information of a definition of that. AgriVoc is multilingual. That means you get this information in multiple languages. Advantage of here is also you can, for example, also search for standard names like corn as a synonym for maize. And you get an auto-completion and can find that directly, then can get to other entities. And here you see what an ontology can give you in addition. In this example, you see that additional information are formalized. In this example, it's formalized that sea maize can have a disease, which is that one. You get more information here. It has certain pathogens. It is used for some food products and so on. So that's a kind how linked data can be seen, that you have additional information on another source which can be directly linked without you doing anything in providing these resources. And here's another example of one of the contents of the agriculture. What you find here is more the chemical information, but you get in this definition a lot more. You get that it's a fungicide, that it controls certain diseases caused by certain organisms, and you get also the information that it's toxic. So that's in this case, in the definition case, only information for the human. It would be in the ideal case that you have this information directly as linked data that can be used from a data science aspect. Okay, so I'll try to finalize now my, so to finalize it only with short, there's a lot of going on in this direction, a lot of other points which are not solved. One is how you combine this complex research, putting together all steps from raw data with the algorithm to the different points of derived data to connect that all. That's currently not done. A lot of work is done to define whole workflow and make them machine actionable. That's something which is, for example, done if you hear something about RO crate. Without going into any details, you can look that up in the slides if you're interested in. They're coming up first databases that's from the Natural Science Collection, who really focus to try that in the way to do, it's really in the case of linked data, provide digital objects and provide a lot of data to every digital object and combine that in a kind of linked data. That's one of the project is DISCO. And for that, as I said before, a lot of ontologies are necessary, and one which might be interesting for PhenoRob is the EU project ENRI, which is focusing on the earth sciences, and where the project coordinator is Andreas Petzold from the Research Center Jülich. So that might be also a good connection for future projects. So, and with that, I would like to stop and summarize my talk today. Wherever possible, store your data and metadata already in internal repository. So it makes much more easier at the end to publish the data, assign persistent identifier to every step of your data, describe your data with rich metadata. Wherever possible, use standards for your metadata. So make use of low-hanging fruits. If you have published your data already outside repositories, so not available or only as supplementary information, we'll think of secondary publishing it in a repository. Overall, we are not there yet, but there's an enormous development in this field. And also the national research data infrastructures will play a major role in Germany to customize this in different domains. And I think for PhenoRob, NFDI for Earth is important, and hopefully FAIR or Agro will come as well. And also in proposals, you can calculate really an essential part for research data management, because the funding organizations are more and more aware of the challenges and the need in this area. And then you have also the budget to do really more there. And with that, I would like to stop.